that the people who are not here still have access to it, but there's nothing quite as positive or beneficial or meaningful as being in the live session. So thank you for coming. I separated period 3 into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 subcategories, each of which kind of dominated one chunk of the week that we had on period 3. So like each of these things is almost its own week of class with a couple exceptions. Like we didn't spend a week on the legacies. We didn't spend a week on Revolutionary Society, but we did spend a week on the road to revolution, the outcomes of the revolution. We most definitely spent a week on the Articles of Confederation and state constitutions. We most definitely spent a week on the Constitution, and we most definitely spent a week on the Federalist period. So I think it's helpful as you think about period 3 is to think in these chunks, right? The road to revolution, the revolution itself, and then the outcomes of the revolution, of which there are a various amount that are all important, right? We talked in class last week that we shift from a fear of tyranny to a fear of mob rule. That is an outcome. We have a 2-party system. That is an outcome. So all these things are really important to think about. But we'll work through this chronologically, and we'll start here first with the road to revolution. And I'm going to put this on like a chronological piece. I'm going to say 1754, and then I'm going to cut this off at like 1775, okay? So the things to note up here, and I'd love for you to participate in the chat or out loud, what are some key milestones that we should make sure we're aware of on the road to revolution? I'll take anybody that wants to throw it in the chat or that wants to turn their mic on and say something. What are some of the key milestones or events or developments or SFI, specific factual information, we should be aware of on the road to revolution? Anybody? Good. Laura, thank you. The 7 Years' War, right? So this is the big turning point to start with, right? The 7 Years' War is our first real like turning point event because that ends in the Treaty of Paris, 1763. And that's kind of where it all kind of goes, not wrong necessarily, but it all definitely goes a little haywire from there. Now, I'm going to add something to this, though, that I think is important, and that is that within the 7 Years' War, we see our first attempt at colonial unity, which is the, if anyone remembers, what's the first attempt to get the colonies all to work together? Anybody remember what that's called? I know you do. Anybody? Chat it up, turn your mic on, say hello, join the party. What is the first attempt at colonial unity called?
Isn't it the Albany Plan of Union?
Atta girl, Kim, good job, right? The Albany Plan of Union, which of course is proposed by our boy Ben Franklin, and it fails. It fails, but the Albany Plan of Union does at least set the precedent that the colonists maybe can work together under one roof, right? After the Treaty of Paris is signed, the colonists England gets all this important land. They spread out to this land. So why don't we do this? Put a little arrow over here, link these two bad boys. They spread out past the Appalachian Mountains. That's going to really upset our Native American neighbors who are going to have an uprising that's really important, which is Pontiac's Rebellion, in which the Native Americans are very upset by this expansionism and burn down a bunch of British forts and a bunch of colonial settlements, etc. And that is going to lead us to our first example of the end of salutary neglect, if you will, which is going to be the proclamation line of 1763. So understanding how these things are all interconnected is super important in understanding period 3 in terms of like big turning points and some of the continuities and changes that are important. So from here, we go through a series of important British actions and colonial reactions that push the colonists all the way from being really happy and proud British subjects that are super thrilled with the British win in the 7 Years' War and they're really excited to be part of this bigger British Empire, to 12 years later being incredibly upset and ready to throw tea in the sea and have a revolution. So this might come in handy on your SAQ this weekend. Note, some would argue that this is in fact the revolution. This chunk right here of these 20 years, that's the revolution. That's the big change, is the hearts and the minds of the people towards independence. Now, the things to note here that are really important that I'd want you to know: Stamp Act, and then the subsequent, make this a little bigger for you, because that creates the first organized riots, protests. The Sons of Liberty are formed, not Liberty, Liberty are formed, and the Daughters of Liberty are formed, so I don't want to do that. Right. And the Stamp Act leads to, which is just as important, the Stamp Act is going to lead to, I'm going to put a little arrow so we see what I'm doing here. It leads to the Stamp Act Congress. The Stamp Act Congress. And the Stamp Act Congress is a meeting of the colonies. 9 colonies show up to together print the Stamp Act resolutions, in which they say to King George, like, hey man, this is not cool. This is not cool. You can't be doing this to us. You don't give us any consent in this taxing policy. We don't have representation. We are now being taxed and represented by a government that has not asked us for our opinion. So you need to get rid of this Stamp Act or we're going to be real mad. Right? And setting the precedent for what comes later, the king and parliament agree. They get rid of the Stamp Act. It teaches the colonists that when they get mad enough and complain enough, then sometimes they get their way, and the British government gives them what they want, which is a repealed tax. So we look at the Stamp Act actually as one of the most important turning points, because it's the one that if you remember from class, it's the one that impacts all the social classes. Right? It's going to impact poor people, middle class people, rich people, which is why it creates such opposition, such united frustration with the British. But as other examples that you should know, the Townshend Acts are I don't know what's happening there. Let me instead put it over here. Townshend Acts are a good example. We have the Declaratory Act. What is happening? That's why I don't trust me with technology. There it goes. The Declaratory Act, which is a good example of not a new tax, but the British reminding the colonists that they can tax them whenever they want, with their parliament, they have ultimate control. We'll put some more over here. The Quartering Act, which forces the colonists to house British soldiers, which is going to upset them. We can add over here important things as well that come out of the Quartering Act, which are related, such as the Boston Massacre, right? And then all that's going to lead to a point, all this together. I could draw arrows through all of if you need me to, but I think you guys kind of got the point. All of this together is going to lead to, by 1773, this feeling of frustration on both sides of the Atlantic. As the colonists feel that their voice is not being heard, the British feel frustrated that like they can't get the colonists to agree to pay a tax, even though they're part of the empire. So this frustration is going to bubble up with the Tea Act. So why don't I put a new Post-it right over here, because that's going to be a big turning point as well. This is 1773. I'm going to pause now and ask you, what is the consequence of the Tea Act? What does the Tea Act lead directly to?
The Boston Tea Party?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, the Boston Tea Party, right? It also happened in 1773. Good job, really, really good job. And because of the Boston Tea Party, what is the British reaction to the Boston Tea Party?
Intolerable Acts.
Good, really good job. The Intolerable Acts, which is really where things get kind of crazy, right? We see the shutting down of Boston Harbor. We see the shutting down of the Colonial Assembly in Massachusetts. We see this is really the first time the British try to respond with force by saying, we're going to force you, hence the name of the acts, which are actually the coercive or to coerce acts. We're going to use force to show you that we mean business and you're going to listen to these laws. You're going to pay back for that tea. This is unacceptable. Right? So this is the first time when the British are like, we've had enough. We've absolutely had enough. But the colonists also say, we've had enough too. So what comes out of the Intolerable Acts is just as important because that's going to lead directly to our first Continental Congress, which we see 12 out of 13 show. And that's important because it's demonstrating the thing that I'd like to see, like in your writing, if I were to ask you about this, is this demonstrates growing colonial unity. And that's dangerous for the British because growing colonial unity means that the colonies, North, Middle, South, are all kind of uniting under this idea that they're being taxed unfairly. And it's out of this first Continental Congress that they promised to meet again in a year to see if anything's happened. In that year, war has broken out, and the British military is very present, and it becomes very obvious and apparent that war is inevitable. Now I'm going to switch categories because I think everything that comes next kind of actually falls under fighting and winning the war. And we'll start here with Lexington and Concord, which is the first example of bloodshed at the hands of the formal British Army. The Boston Massacre you could count if you wanted to, but it's not quite related to the war itself. And out of this comes, move this to the side a little bit. Having a good time with this little whiteboard, it's fun. It's this bloodshed that's going to lead to, oh, no, I wanted that to connect. There we go. To the Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress is going to be really important because we see much more colonial representation. And the Second Continental Congress is going to put out their olive branch petition. And which they tell King George, like, hey, we don't want independence. At this point, we like being British still. We'd like to stay here. We'd like to be part of your empire. We just want to go back to the way things were, right? They want to go back. Just let us return to salutary neglect. Let us go back to the way things were. Let us go back to being part of your mercantilistic empire. We don't mind you taxing our exports. We don't mind the Navigation Acts. We don't mind having to ship our goods just to England. That's fine. But let us go back to not being taxed directly because that's not fair. We don't have representation in Parliament. And King George says, go to hell. King George says, nope, really don't care. You are in rebellion. And because you're in rebellion, we're not negotiating with you. We're not talking to you. We're not going to say a thing to you until you stop your stupid rebellion. So it's kind of funny to think about it in that King George declares the colonists to be in rebellion before the colonists declare themselves to be in rebellion by declaring independence. So it's kind of funny to think about that we think like the Declaration of Independence is this big monumental thing of that we've declared independence, we're going to fight England. England had already said a year prior, like, you guys are in rebellion, we're not talking to you. So in a sense, like, England does this first and the colonists follow. But also noteworthy here in this time, of course, is our most important text we've discussed so far, which is Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And it's this book that really sways the everyday people's mind by publishing a book that becomes a bestseller and doing it in such common language, in such approachable language, allows everyday people to really hear arguments that resonate with them, right? He gives the economic reasons. Why? Right? Like, we could trade with everybody and we're stuck trading with them. And look at all these awesome economic resources we have. Why are we just trading with England? Right? He gives scientific reasons. Like, you don't see the Earth orbiting around the little moon. Why is our massive area having to act as if we were the little moon for the Earth that is England? We're bigger than they are. He uses logical arguments like every time we're mad at them, we have to sign a letter and it takes freaking 4 months to get to them and then months more for us to get a response. And by then things are like, this is insanity. We need to be independent. So common sense plays a pretty significant role on public opinion towards the revolution. And by 1776, our committee of three, of course, Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, are going to declare independence, and then it's off to the races. So it's important that we link the way in which common sense and the Declaration of Independence are related, because they are quite related. And they help us understand public opinion and how things have shifted. Now, the only thing to know during the war, is a couple of things to know during the war, in terms of like win factors, home field advantage. The colonists don't have to win the war. I'm going to say this again, this is an important point, but I wish I'd made better in class. The colonists don't have to win the war. They just have to fight long enough for England to say, we're tired of this, we're going to go home. Right? Because the colonists are fighting for their independence and they're fighting at home, they just have to kick England in the shins long enough until England's like, screw this, it's not worth our time anymore, we're out. Which is exactly what happens. Home field advantage matters. George Washington matters. As the general in charge of the Continental Army, he keeps things together for a long time when many other men would have given up. It's quite impressive. And also what matters maybe more than any of those other two is, I'll ask you guys now so you have a chance to contribute. What's the main reason, one of the last remaining main reason why the colonists win the Revolutionary War?
The French helped them out.
Let her go, Kimmy. The French, right? French support our allies, the French, which is going to come back to bite the French in the ass later when we're like, yeah, never mind. French support, which only comes after the Battle of Saratoga, when we convince the French that maybe there's a chance that the colonists can win on their own. Okay? So the war is going to end with the Battle of Yorktown, which isn't necessarily important, but I want to make sure that it's here anyway, because, I don't want to leave important things out. Battle of Yorktown. If you listen to the Hamilton soundtrack, there's a very good song in the Battle of Yorktown that I think is pretty well done. But out of this comes, monumentally speaking, the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, which grants independence to the American colonists that are now seen by England and the world as a free and independent country, and it's a big deal. And now somehow the colonists have to figure out how the heck to govern themselves, which is where things get challenging. So we're free. That's exciting. What does this new free independent society look like? A couple things. I'm gonna put in quotation marks, egalitarianism, which is a fancy way of saying like society that governs for the common good. I put it in quotation marks because it's hard to talk about an egalitarian society that leaves out women's voices, people of color's voices, Native American voices, as well as includes slavery. But it is a society that does attempt to govern more for the common good than what we would see in Europe, which is why it's still on here. We should also talk here about Republican motherhood, which I saw a lot of you guys including in your essays today and Tuesday, which I think is incredibly helpful. And we should also talk here about Revolutionary era emancipation, right? As our northern states are going to abolish slavery during and immediately after the Revolutionary War, while southern states do not do that. We also see a society, if you remember the slide on it, that's built more, not entirely, but more on merits over heredity. So we talk about, like, maybe you'll get a question at some point about, like, how revolutionary was the revolution? And you could say, like, kind of revolutionary because, a society built on Republican principles and egalitarianism, but it's not that revolutionary because it still leaves out women, African Americans, slaves, etc. So those are some of the societal characteristics that we should note. The first example of the government, as you know, is the Articles of Confederation, which are ratified in 1781. Add that in here just for fun, right? Super fun, if you're me. Let me move this bad boy. Get away from our stickers, from our Post-its. If you guys knew me, the way you'll know me by the end of the year, my desk is always covered in Post-its. So I love this little whiteboard thing because it makes me feel like I'm, really at school. I love Post-its. They're everywhere. I'll show you. Post-its. That's a light day. Usually it's way more than that. Post-it addict. All right. Articles of Federation. Give me some of the features, if you could, either out loud or in the chat. What are some of the features of the articles you think are worth noting? How are the articles designed? What can they do? What can't they do? Give me some of the features, guys. This is where we should be a little fresher because it's more recent. Come on, y'all.
There's Federalists and Anti-Federalists.
Not yet. That's going to come here. That's about the Constitution, but you're super close. You're super close, and you are correct. It's going to come one little area of post-its later. Cool. What else? What else? I guarantee you, if you
Weren't they used to weaken the government?
sir, absolutely super weak national government. Thank you. Great job. Super weak national government. Cool. What else? What are some other features or?
They can't.
Good. Right. Can't tax. Good job, Solange. Can't tax. Can only request taxes. What if you guys went to went to go get food and they didn't charge you money? They just requested you money. Like, hey, like, what do I owe? Well, we can't force you to pay, but we'd like you to pay $10. You're gonna be like, cool. Thanks for my food. I'm out. You gonna request money? No, I'm not doing that. Yeah, they can't tax the states or the people. They can only request taxes. Good. What else? There's a bunch of other features we should talk about. Come on. There may or may not be a short answer question on the actual Articles of Confederation. May or may not be. I don't know. I didn't write the test. Just kidding. Yes, I did. Let me look at the test. Make sure that I'm not. I had a lot of questions to pick from. Yep. We got one on political parties. We got one on the Articles of Confederation. We got one on the ladies. All right. Cool. So what else do we know about the Articles? What can they do? What can't they do? Is it by how many branches of government? What? Come on, guys. I know you know. The chat.
The only two successes were the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance.
A girl. All right, we got some successes. Hey, check them out. The Articles are a big win. It's almost like your question tomorrow might ask you to name a success of the Articles of Confederation. Crazy. Eliana, good work. So we'll put successes as the Land Ordinance because it established orderly Western expansion. Not a success if you were a Native American, but is a success for governance of the United States. And the other important success is the Northwest Ordinances, which, as you know, bans slavery in the Northwest Territory. Right? Not in the rest of the country, but just in the Northwest Territory. That in these new states that we're going to acquire, these states will be equal states like everybody else. They'll get representation. They'll get votes in Congress. They won't have slavery. Good, Eliana. Thank you. Cool. What else, y'all? What else should we know about the Articles?
Each state only had one vote.
Beautiful. Each state has one vote. All right, so that's cool for the small states, not so much for the big states. Good. Esley's hitting me on the private chat, which is freaking awesome. Good job. She put 9 out of 13 states need to pass a law, which is hard to do. That's a super majority. And you got 13 out of 13 needed to amend the Constitution, to change the Constitution, to change the Articles. So that makes it it's a crappy government that's also very hard to change, which is a bad combination. We do see some chaos that comes out of the Articles of Confederation, which my friend Jenny has put down here on the chat, which I appreciate. Let me add a new sticker for us, Jenny. I'm gonna put it right here. And that's gonna be Shays Rebellion. All right, Shays Rebellion, in which all these debtors are upset with their taxes and the fact that they can't pay their taxes, and so they're losing their farms. A lot of them are Revolutionary War veterans. The economy sucks. Spain has shut off access to the Mississippi River. Esley just added awesome similarities as well here in the chat that I should add, which she put, very important, that I should have included earlier. No president, so no executive, and no judiciary. So it's just a unicameral legislative branch that's supposed to do everything. Legislative branch that's supposed to take care of everything, right? Which is one of the problems by having one vote per state if this is all we have, right? So Shays Rebellion happens in Massachusetts. I saw a lot of you including it today as outside evidence in your, or contextualization for the fact that Americans like to rebel against taxes. Shays Rebellion happens because people can't get their economy in order. It is a little bit of a mess and a struggle. The rebellion can't be put down. We talk here about like, oh, I don't know what just happened. We got real close to Shay's Rebellion though. Oh, now we got real far from Shay's Rebellion. What's going on? What we do know here is that this makes uneasy people in society think of mob rule. Right? It looks like mob rule because the masses are rebelling. This is what happens when there's too much democracy and no check on the people. It's crazy. It's terrible. We need to have a stronger government, which is why this leads directly to. Nope. No, not that guy. No. Let's try this again. Go on, technology. My poor computer's been freaking out. There it goes. Cool. It leads directly to the Constitutional Convention, which happens in 1787. Boom. And of course, this isn't the first attempt to fix these problems. The Annapolis Convention happened first, but that doesn't get enough people to really make any change. But like the First Continental Congress, it sets up the idea that like we should meet again to see if we can fix these problems, which they do, and they attempt then to solve the problems of society by making a stronger national government with the Constitution. Now, give me, I need you to chat or out loud, I don't care which. Give me some of the deets, some of the details, some of the, I'm going to add a bunch more post-its because we're going to need them. Maybe some of the characteristics of the Constitution, some of the compromises of the Constitution, some of the powers of the government of the Constitution. What do we got here? Give me some stuff, y'all. Beautiful. Jenny tells me that there is a House of Representatives. What is the House of Representatives based on? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller. And there is a Senate. How do we decide representation in these two things? Anybody can speak up. I know you know. The chat is fine as well if you're more comfortable there. What decides how many votes each state gets in the House of Representatives?
House of Representatives is by population, and Senate, each state has 2 representatives.
So the House of Representatives is population based. The Senate, good job, Solange, I love it, is 2 votes per state, regardless of how big your state is. Now, who remembers what the compromise is that creates this idea? Because that's important.
It's the Great Compromise.
Good. Fantastic. Fantastic. That is the Great or the Connecticut Compromise, which is, of course, proposed by our boy from Connecticut, Roger Sherman. But Esley's point in the chat is very valid, that this is a combination of 2 proposals. Let me slide to the left. The New Jersey plan, which was the small state plan, all right, so that it kind of just mirrored what the Articles did, but gave it a little more power. And the Virginia plan, which proposed that everything be based on population. And the Great Compromise kind of just says, why don't we just combine those 2 into a way better plan that just makes the big states and the small states happy. So good job, Jenny. Good job, Esley. Good job, Solange. What else should we know about the Constitution? Come on, y'all. Good, Jenny. The 3/5 compromise. All right, the deal with the devil, if you will. You might remember the line from John Adams where he says, like, the evil of slavery was known, but breaking up the country was worse. So this acceptance of the keeping of slavery to keep the Union together is noteworthy. So slaves will count as 3/5 of a person in representation reasons, which actually I'm going to draw a line here because that matters. Why does representation matter? Because of the House of Representatives based on population. Get that over the arrow. Cool. What else? What else, y'all? What else should we know about the Constitution?
The Constitution created like a political divide because Federalists or they wanted law and order and were afraid of mob rule. Meanwhile, the anti-Federalists they wanted to avoid the monarchy again. Therefore, they wanted to include more rights that were like directly and specific for protecting liberties.
Yes. I don't know who that was because you didn't pop up on my screen, but that just made my day. Who are you?
Catherine.
Make yourself known. Yes. You are. Maybe you are an angel after all. I love it. Good work. Right. That it creates the way she put it was really smart. That it creates a political divide. As the Federalists are more of this elite in society that want law and order and stability, and the Anti-Federalists are still in fear of too much power in the hands of the government, and is why they insist on, what do the Anti-Federalists insist on?
Bill
A
of Rights.
centralized government.
No, the Anti-Federalists insist on a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights. Good. Which is included to make the Anti-Federalists happy. The Federalists are going to write those really important documents that we analyzed. The Federalist Papers. Oh, what the heck is that? The Federalist Papers. I don't know what's happening here. No, I don't want this little text box in here. Let me write in the freaking, there we go, y'all. Federalist Papers, right, which are written by Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. It's where we get those important lines that we talked about. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. And if men were governed by angels, no check on the government would be necessary. So also important to note here is we have a three-branch government. A three-branch government in which each branch in its own way is going to check the other, right? The legislative branch passed laws, but the president has to approve of them. If he doesn't, yada, yada, yada. We'll talk next unit a lot about this concept of judicial review. Judicial review, which is the belief, the argument that it's the Supreme Court that will determine if laws are legal or not. That's cool. That's cool. I don't know if I'm missing anything on the Constitution and ratification, but I'll put here like checks and balances, right? Just so that's, you know, super cliche and like 8th grade textbooky, but you know, it might be helpful. I will add a post-it for Kat that simply says here, because it comes from the Federal Papers, men are no angels, which is a factual statement as a man. Cool. Good work, everybody. And now that we have a constitution, it gets ratified by 9 of the 13 states. Eventually, all 13 states agree. It becomes the law of the land. Our first president that takes office under the new constitution. So I'll connect. The Bill of Rights is what gets everybody on board to agree. The first president is, of course, our boy, Jorge Washington. Jorge Washington, also known as George. George Washington elected as first president. All right, cool. What are some of the important events, developments, characteristics of Washington's presidency? I'd love for some participation here as we hit the finish line.
His administration wasn't very successful because he didn't like really do anything to improve that country, but like however he like diplomatically like kept America out of conflict with like treaties such as like Jay's Treaty, Pinckney's Treaty, and he issued the Proclamation of Neutrality.
Cool. All right, so let's make a foreign policy category, right? That's a good one. Thank you. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit that his presidency is not that successful, because doing anything the first time is kind of crazy. And I think he does a pretty good job of establishing some really important precedents that are noteworthy. But you mentioned a couple of them, keeping us out of conflicts, and he does so with treaties. So let's hit Jay's Treaty. John Jay, our boy. Jay's Treaty, that's with England. You said Pinckney's Treaty, which gives us access to the port of New Orleans. That's cool. Pinckney Treaty, that's with Spain, to give us access to New Orleans and the Mississippi River. That's important for business. And maybe the most important piece that you noted already of his foreign policy is the Proclamation of Neutrality, which keeps the U.S. out of conflict with France and with England regarding the French Revolution, as well as the new French and British conflict. So that's all important stuff foreign policy-wise. Come on, y'all. Who else has something to add to his domestic policies? What happens under his domestic watch economically, politically? What do we got? The chat is open as well.
Hamilton's financial plan.
That a girl. Good. Hamilton's financial plan, which of course is 3 parts, of which we should know all of them because maybe there's a reason for it. And then I'm gonna just copy and paste this bad boy. Post-its everywhere. A whole party. A party of post-its. It's my kind of party. Y'all know I'm a big fan. First is the assumption of state debts. Second is the establishment of a national bank. Man, can't spell. It's been a long day. And third is revenue. We're going to raise some money. How? With a tariff. It's going to piss off the South because it hurts their agricultural economy. And a whiskey tax, which of course is going to cause us a little bit of trouble in a place I like to call Pennsylvania. Cool. So what does the whiskey tax, speaking of the DBQ today, what does the whiskey tax lead directly to?
The Whiskey Rebellion.
The Whiskey Rebellion. I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure what's more American than having a whiskey rebellion. The only thing I can think of, and you're going to cringe at my dad joke, is a bacon rebellion, because that happened too. Sorry, everybody. I'll be here all week because I can't go anywhere because we're in a freaking pandemic. So anyway, the Whiskey Rebellion takes place. What happens in the Whiskey Rebellion that's different than Shays' Rebellion? Why is the Whiskey Rebellion important in terms of establishing credibility for the Constitution?
That's it.
Oh. Washington sent his military to like shut down like the people like rebelling to show more authority than before, like in Shays' Rebellion, where like everything was like out of order and there was no one to like shut it down.
Yeah. So good job, Kat. Well done. If anything, what happens here is Hamilton and Washington go out together with the army, and they get there, and like the rebellion's kind of all, they heard the army's coming. They're like, man, I'm not really trying to die over some whiskey right now, so I'm just going to call it a day. And what we see then is that a couple things that we see that is important. The Constitution works because laws can be enforced. We passed a law. You gave Congress the power to pass a law. Congress passed the whiskey tax. Now you're rebelling against the whiskey tax. You don't get to just rebel and not follow the law. Here's the army. Shut up and go home. That's part of it. Part of it also is that this pisses off Jefferson and his supporters because they say, like, what kind of country do we live in where people can't even freaking protest? Or, I'm sorry, are we back in England again and the army has to be here to enforce all the order? So it creates a little more social divide and political divide as well. But it does show that the Constitution is strong enough to maintain order, which, if you think about it, that was the goal of the Federalists, right? They didn't like the idea of mob rule. I think it was Kat earlier who was talking about the Federalists liked law and order, which is now a common theme in our freaking 2020 election again. Here we are. Cool. Other things that are noteworthy under Washington's administration, we can add all this stuff together, causes the first two-party system. Then we got the Federalists against the Democratic Republicans. I'll just put Repubs. There you go. Now I'll put the whole word. That's important. Jefferson and his supporters, Hamilton and his supporters. And they're going to be divided over constitutional interpretation. That's the big divide, right? Should we interpret this Constitution loosely and like stretch the power of the federal government when needed? Or should we interpret it strictly and say, if the Constitution does not say you can do that thing, then you cannot do that thing? So this divide is going to be the same divide over the bank. Doesn't say we can do the bank. Doesn't say we can't. Divide over the whiskey excise, divide over all of these things is constitutional interpretation, because who should have more power, the federal government or the state governments? Now, some people get confused on the difference between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists and the Federalists and Democratic Republicans. The difference is these two, the feds and anti-feds, they're examples of factions, meaning they're fighting over one issue. And that one issue is simply the Constitution. So once the Constitution is approved or ratified, those factions dissipate because their work is done. The Federalists and Democratic Republicans are actual organized political parties that are like running candidates for office, that are making political stances on more than just one issue, which is why we have what we have. Now, Eliana put in the chat a phenomenal point that is worth noting, and that one of the big issues of the Constitution that I should actually put back here on the blue, thank you, Eliana, for checking me on that, is the elastic clause. Right? It's the elastic clause that allows for, also called, it's called the elastic clause, it's formally called the necessary and proper clause. It's what allows for the Congress to stretch its powers when it deems necessary. And if you remember last week, 2 weeks ago, reading Jefferson's criticism of the National Bank, he says, he references the elastic clause and says, like, if Congress can do anything it says necessary and proper, and Congress is the one that decides what's necessary and proper, then who's here to keep Congress from just saying, we want to do this crazy thing? It's necessary and proper. And that's his criticism of stretching the national government, is it's a slippery slope that might, in his words, to tyranny or too much power later on. I think we hit most of Washington's things. We hit the foreign policy. That was really well done. We hit economic stability. That was really well done. We hit the first two-party system. We hit the whiskey rebellion. Better than hitting the whiskey. You know what I'm saying? And then post-Washington, we have our next president, who is our boy, the one and only, America's ugliest president to this time, John freaking Adams. I'm not even capitalize his name because he's a joke. John Adams. Now, somebody tell me one good thing that comes out of John Adams' presidency. Just kidding. You can't. Now, what are some things that come out of John Adams' presidency? Give me some of the specifics, some of the SFI that we should note from John Adams.
Could it be the Alien and Sedition Acts?
Yeah, that's absolutely what it could be. The Alien and Sedition Acts, which are the first example of nativism or anti-immigrant sentiments. Anti-immigrant, anti-free speech acts in American history, right? Setting up the precedent that we don't like when people criticize us, we'll just make it harder for them to criticize us, right? This is the equivalent of somebody getting mad that someone's calling them out on Twitter and then just blocking that person because they don't want to hear what they have to say. Moral of the story, the criticism comes from Adams' handling of our conflict with what country? What country do we have beef with at this time?
France?
France. Beautiful. Chris, we have the quasi-war with France. That's caused by impressment. Remember, they're stealing our ships, stealing our cargo. Impressment, it's caused by the XYZ affair. And it's caused by a long-standing beef over not following the treaty. That we didn't come to their defense when they came to ours. They're not very happy about that, right? So this causes criticism. When Adams is criticized, his response to the criticism is to pass the Alien Sedition Acts, which make it harder to criticize the government, easier to deport people, harder to become a citizen. And this is also due, I'm getting a little smaller one. This is also due to political support growing for Democratic Republicans amongst new immigrants from France, from England, from Ireland, excuse me. So this growing support, like you guys, we talked about this in class. If you were new to America and likely poor, you're not going to support the Federalist policies because their policies are beneficial to the upper class, right? So these new immigrants are supporting the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalist solution is to make it harder to, I don't know, vote, be a citizen, right? It's easier just to stop criticism than anything else. So that is that for Adams' presidency. I wish I had more to tell you from John Adams, but I will say this. Most presidents Almost always in history, most presidents get 2 terms. Right? America usually prefers to re-elect a president than to elect a brand new one after 4 years. The first president to only get 1 term is, of course, John Adams. The second president to only get 1 term, because after Adams comes Jefferson, he gets 2 terms. James Madison, who wrote the Constitution, he gets 2 terms. James Monroe, he gets 2 terms. The next president to only get 1 term and then not get reelected, John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son. So the Adams family, no pun intended, is kind of like the Walking Dead on reelecting presidents. Now, the other thing to come out of the Alien Sedition Act that I need you to be aware of, because it does play a role in tomorrow's or whenever you take its test, is the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which introduced the idea of nullification, that a state has the right to just nullify or ignore a federal law they see as unconstitutional, is attempted by Jefferson and Madison as they attempt to find a way to stop what they see as an unconstitutional limitation of First Amendment rights, and they are correct that the Alien Sedition Acts were unconstitutional. But because we haven't really figured out our systems in place yet, there's questions over whose job it is to say, no, Congress, you can't do that. There is, I gave you this to you in class too. It's a cool little handout, a cool little table I put on your notes last week. I don't like that. I want to connect this with this. There we go. There's the compact theory, which is like the states' rights theory, which believes in pro-nullification. It says if the states made the Constitution, so it's their job to decide if the Constitution is being violated. The opposite of that, the counter to that, is the contract theory. Oh, I lost my box. In addition to losing my mind. The contract theory, which says, no, the national government is made by the people, not the states, and thus the Supreme Court determines constitutionality. And this, again, I understand completely that this is kind of a weird topic and a weird concept. It'll make more sense later, but it is important to note now that the Virginia Kentucky resolutions are the foundation of this question of whose job is it to say no Congress or no president, you can't do that, it's unconstitutional. Now, all we have left on this crazy posted game that we just played is the legacies of the revolution. I think the legacies are important. All right, legacies of the revolution, we see economic stability. Thanks, Hamilton. We see a legacy of diplomacy, of solving our problems with other countries via negotiation as opposed to via formal war. We see a legacy of the revolution as advanced role for women, but still way too limited. John Adams did in fact forget the ladies despite the insistence of his lovely wife Abigail. What else can we put as a? Ooh, I got a good one. Divide over slavery, growing. Right, as the northern states are abolishing slavery, and the southern states are keeping it. We also see an important legacy of the revolution of westward expansion. You can make an argument, and I would encourage you to do this, that one of the main causes of the war was wanting to spread westward. But the British insistence on following that proclamation line and not spreading out is one of the main motivators of the colonists in their frustration. It's not just the taxes, right? It's the lack of representation. It's the restrictions on where they can spread out to. There's a whole bunch of other reasons that are present that we should know as well. I'll also add to our legacies Republican ideals. That in both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, they put into place Republican ideals, meaning representative government. Not a direct democracy, but a representative government in which we elect people and they go represent us. So it is 3:25. We have done it. We have done all of period 3 in one crazy map with arrows everywhere and all kinds of nonsense going on. But I'm proud of all of you for engaging and for sticking around. I'll stay for a minute and answer any questions anybody has. But if that's all you need, then I'm going to post this bad boy online later if you need to look at it again. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again. I know it's a long day. I get it. I wish there was another way. But just know that if we were in school, I'd be making you stay after school on a Thursday to study with me anyway. So, hey, at least you get to do it from the comfort of your own homes. Have a great day. Thanks again. Love y'all. Be good.
Bye, mister.
All right, take care, my friend.